Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. My name is Andy Menon. Today we are going to be taking a look at the UiPath Robot JavaScript SDK. So a quick background on what is it that I'm doing on this page. RPA as a technology is maturing pretty quickly, and what I mean by that is, we are all used to looking at automations through the UiPath assistant or through the orchestrator and running it either from the assistant or scheduling it through the orchestrator. But that is not the case anymore. Automation is becoming part and parcel of every industry standard technology these days. You can see Microsoft has come up with Power Automate. ServiceNow has integrated with IntelliBot. Salesforce is integrating with Automation Anywhere. So it's not surprising that we need to integrate ourselves into mainstream applications or applications that uh, we are going to be building or already have been built. A few weeks ago, I was working with apps and I had the opportunity to build a full-fledged app. And that app brought about 3 or 4 automations together. So it brought all the automations on one screen. And I rarely got to look at the assistant, which was nice because if you have the same arrangement for a business user, the business user doesn't really have to go and run those attended automations from the UiPath assistant. So this was one of the technologies I wanted to take a look at. So I started with this page and I watched this video, but to to tell you frankly, it did not make much of a sense to me. So uh, without having any exposure to how this works, I was not able to comprehend fully the content of this video. So I started doing some research on this, and that led me down to this part of this page. And we have the developer guide that is a link to the forum post when the UiPathRobot.js SDK came out back in 2019, I think. And then this is the user guide PDF, which is very useful for us. And we'll be looking at this frequently during this series of videos. So I'm going to straight away start with this user guide because it has got the schematic of how this whole thing works. So let me start with that. And if I click on this link, it's going to take me to this PDF. This PDF is pretty useful. It has a schematic and it also gives you step-by-step instructions on how to set this up. But this is my problem. I followed the instructions, but uh, uh, this is 2021 and these instructions were published quite a while back. So it does not work the way it is supposed to. And I had to apply many number of fixes to get it working. And that's what we'll be talking about. Let's take a look at the technical overview. This is a pretty well summarized diagram. And so this is the scenario for everyone who's familiar with RPA. You have your local machine and you have your robot, and the robot is connected to the orchestrator, and the robot is capable of invoking those processes. This is pretty standard process. You open up UiPath Assistant and you access your process and it starts running. But if you want to externalize this process of accessing your automations, then you would like to integrate with an external client. And what does an external client mean? It means that it can be a web page that you deploy in your intranet or your enterprise, or it could be a standard desktop application like any one of your office applications. So how this works is there is an external web page or a desktop application. We'll call that as an external client. And that external client works with the help of this JavaScript SDK. Now, this SDK establishes communication with the add-in that's part of your robot. So if you have UiPath 2019 and above, this add-in is already part of your robot and you don't have to install it separately. Let us say you want to run a process directly from your web page or your Office application. So when you initiate the action to run the automation, the SDK communicates to your add-in, and the add-in in turn, requests a robot to fetch the process that needs to be executed, and then the process begins to run. So the advantage here is you really do not have to leave the confines of your uh, external client. So, for example, you can start an automation directly from Outlook or Excel. And I think the samples pages has a couple of implementations that have been published. So this is how this whole setup works. So now let's move on to the next section. There are a few prerequisites that you have to follow before you can get this running. The first thing is obvious. You need to have Studio greater than version 19.10. Obviously, this is 2021. I really doubt if you're still using anything lesser than this version. So I am assuming that you have Studio. You are familiar with the process of opening up an existing project in your Studio and deploying it to the orchestrator. The next step is you got to download your uh, boilerplate application, and let's go straight away to the sample application. So there is a boilerplate application that's been deployed to the samples page. Now here is the problem. At the time when this boilerplate sample was published, it probably worked, and we had no we would not have encountered any problems. But if you download the sample today and run it based on the instructions here, it's not going to run. The first thing we're going to do is going to follow the instructions that work, and that is to go to the samples page and download the samples or the boilerplate application. So let me click on this and see where that takes me. Right. So here is the samples page, and this is the boilerplate sample. And if you download this, you will see this in your downloads folder. There is a zip file called robot.js-sample. So as a first step, you're going to just extract the contents of the zip file and put it somewhere convenient on your machine. C:\users public documents, and I have this folder unzipped. Now this folder has got a few components. One is the index.html file. We'll get to it in a few. The first thing you will most likely do, and which is an easy thing to do, is open up this workflow folder. You will see the project. You'll open it in Studio. You will build the project and deploy it to your orchestrator. For ease of use, or for the purposes of this demo, deploy it to a classic folder. Do not deploy it to a modern folder. I'll tell you why when we get to that point. So this there is nothing earth-shattering about this application. So if you open up the application in Studio, so we are inside this project. The first thing that you got to note, just for the purposes of this demonstration, is please do not change the name of this project. Right? Let's keep this the way it is, and I'll show you later why. So let's quickly get to what this application does. It has some input arguments. You're going to give it, a Boolean argument and a string argument, and then you're going to get things out of it. So what it basically does is you put in your first and last name, and it gives you the full name. You put in a Boolean argument and a numeric argument. It simply returns you those values. So that's all it does, right? It's simple, but it's very significant as far as this demo is concerned. So when you publish it, please make sure that the name remains as is. So once you're done with this, the next step is a little more detailed. And I hope that you already have Node.js installed. If you don't have Node.js installed, please go ahead and install it. And to have the convenience of using Node.js from anywhere on your system, you should likely add it to your path on your Windows machine. So I have already added it. I already have Node.js here, so I've already added that path. So if I go to path, you can see that I have the path to Node.js. And another important thing is make sure that you install Node Packet Manager, NPM. Because you will need it to install the next program that you need to get this entire setup working, and that is the lite-server. So I'm going with lite-server because the lite-server is a lightweight web server for testing and developing web applications locally. And because Node is already installed, it is easy to get started. How do we install lite-server? What you got to do is you got to be careful about how you install and run lite-server. This is the root of your application. So coming back to this folder, you will see that your robot.js sample is considered the root of your application. And under the root of the application is an index.html page. So what we have to do is we have to get to this path in the command prompt. And then you got to go back to the user guide and run this command. You can opt to go with the Python option discussed here, but I'm going to just demonstrate the lite-server option because that worked pretty easily on this machine. So you got to run this command, npm install -g lite-server. So it's going to install itself, but remember, it's not going to install itself in this root folder. You will most likely see a lite-server being installed and run from your app data folder. So here, this is my app data folder, and under the roaming subfolder, I have the npm modules, and lite-server operates from there. So what this means is you can run lite-server from anywhere, but that's where the problem is. You can run lite-server from anywhere, but if you don't have any files under that folder, then if you try to access lite-server in your browser, it's going to show you a lot many errors, and it's basically useless. So what you got to do is you got to make sure that you are under the root of your application. I'm already here. I'm going to run lite server. And if you have done everything right, you should see something like this. Please note that you can ignore these messages because you haven't configured and customized lite-server, but it's going to give you a bunch of URLs, and we are going to be focusing on the local URL. And this is the local host, and your port number might be different, but this is the URL that we must be focusing on. I'm going to access this in the browser. Now remember, you started lite-server from the root of your application, and this is where your index.html page resides. And lite-server needs a page to display when you open up your browser and navigate to the website. In my case, I have run this many number of times. What's going to happen in your case is you're going to look at an authorization dialog where this page will ask you to authorize the script to access all of the information that's available to UiPath Assistant on this machine. So what do I mean by that? If I go back to the JS user guide, you will see something like this. This is if you're doing it for the first time, and you're going to grant access to open the UiPath assistant, and then obviously the code is going to match. And once you have granted access, what's going to happen is the script is going to load, and when the script loads, it's going to pull up a list of all the processes that are available on your assistant. But there are a few problems. Remember, we have not changed anything in index.html or the JavaScript. If you click any of these buttons, nothing's going to work. And you will most likely not see this list. You will not see this list. most likely. And I'll tell you why that is. And that's what we're going to be talking about next. So for this to work, we'll have to go and make a few changes to the index.html page that I just showed you, a few minutes ago. So let's see what those changes are. And then once you make those changes on your end, you will be able to see the screen, something similar to this on your end. So let's go back to this page in the application root, and I'm going to open this up in a text editor. So if I scroll all the way down, you will see that there is a reference to the UiPathRobot.js script. The original download will have this path. And if you try to access this path in your browser, you will see that you do not have access. So if I go in here and copy paste this, either the script has been removed or access to this CDN has been removed. So let's go back and see what happens if I enable this and if I disable this line. So I've saved this page. I'm going to save it again, and I'm going to go back to my browser and I'm going to refresh this page. None of these buttons work. There is nothing happening. So you simply have a page that is not referring to any script, and it's basically an HTML shell. It's a dead page. So this is the first change you have to make. So I'm going to undo all these changes and apply the fix. So what's the fix? It is pretty obvious. You got to disable this line here, and you got to add the reference to this script. So once you add this and save this page, right? I'm going to save this again. And if I go back to the browser and refresh it, there it is. So we have got our page back. So now, if you run any of these automations using the invoke button, they will run. But here is the problem. If you are giving these automations any kind of input parameters and getting outputs back, then running these automations using the invoke button is next to useless, because you're not able to pass any parameters in. And you're not getting any parameters out. So your script is not built for that. So running these is useful only if you have an automation that doesn't take any inputs and doesn't return any outputs, right? So how do we test this? So that is the reason why this download comes with that sample application. So as I said, the first step for you would be to deploy this sample application to your orchestrator. And I also did mention that you would want to keep this name unchanged, right? So, and this is the reason why I told you. And I'll also show you why you have to keep this constant for another reason. Now, how do I run this application? If I run this here, it's going to work. It accepts arguments, it returns values, but it doesn't throw any errors. So it's simply going to run. If there are no inputs, it's not going to complain. It's simply going to say, I'm done. So I'm going to hit the invoke button to see if my script works. So I'm going to hit invoke. There it is. This application has run. It has completed, but because you have not passed it any inputs or received any outputs, this is basically, this test is basically to confirm that your automations are working. So how do we pass in the parameter arguments through the web app? And that is why you have this application here that's as clear as daylight. So it says browser embedding sample with arguments. So I'm going to just say this RPA Vanguard. I'm going to say 2, no, maybe 1, and I'm going to say true, and I'm going to run the sample process. Let's see what it returns this time. Nice. So here we have a more meaningful output. So we gave it the first and last name, and it returned the full name. You passed it a numeric value, and that value has been returned, and a Boolean value has also been returned. So if you get up to this point, you're good. But there is one other problem that we are going to talk about, and that is what happens when the same application is deployed to a modern folder, and will it work the way we saw it here? And if it didn't work, what are the fixes that we need to apply so that we can run any automation from an external client, such as this web page, regardless of where that automation has been deployed, whether it is a classic folder or whether it is to your modern My Workspace folder. So we'll take a look at that next.